Great, great, great. Welcome, everyone. Sorry for that issue. Thank you for finding your way here. We're not going to let Karen go on vacation anymore. There we go. Welcome, everyone. Last webinar of the year. We're just going to take things as they are. All right. I see. Yeah, so we changed the date of the webinar, and I suspect that somewhere in the bowels of the Eventbrite, the date wasn't changed, and so it was thinking, or Zoom, it was thinking it was last week, not this week. That's actually probably what happened, is we didn't change it on Zoom, but we changed it on Eventbrite. Great, and people are still coming in pretty quickly. It's like, when you make microwave popcorn and you have to wait till the kernels, the popping slows down to a certain speed before you turn off the microwave. So I feel like that's what we're doing here. All right, great. Well, thank you so much for being here, everybody that managed to find their way with the broken link and the change in time. Apologize for all the changes. As you notice, I have a different background. I was busy moving last week, so that is why we had to move it. And I appreciate people showing up here at the very, very tail end of the year, just about. So we're going to get started here. Go ahead, Jake. You can go to that. As we go, feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A as we go. We lose them in the chat. The Q&A, it's a little bit easier to follow, so we can make sure we get to your questions. For folks coming in, if you want to drop where you are and what organization you're with into the chat, it's always nice to see who's here. And then at the end of the webinar, we will provide some links for that should say January webinar. We're really together today, folks. We're doing great for the January webinar and to request a follow-up meeting. All right, Jake, you want to go to the next slide? So, we're talking about 2024, but we can't talk about 2024 and what to expect next year without talking about 2023, because some really big things happened this year. So for starters, back in the spring or sort of middle of the year, ReFed updated its impact calculator. And so this did two things. So first of all, it changed the destination of surplus food and considers that in the evaluation. Previously, the most commonly used tool was the EPA tool, and that really only looked at four sort of destinations for surplus food or four solutions. One was prevention or source reduction, and then the others were landfill, composting, and anaerobic digestion. The new impact calculator vastly expands that. And so it includes donations to people, animal food, industrial uses, food not harvested, land application, incineration, and sewer and dumping, which is a really new to think about. Go to the next one, Jake. I want to add they also have improved their calculation based on type of food. And so they will have a standard mix like from a grocery store. So when they're calculating the impact using the ReFed calculator, it's going to look at what the standard mix of food is that is donated by a grocery store. And it's going to take into account the impact in the supply chain. So the upstream impact, if you will. This is really important because if you think about a strawberry, let's talk about a strawberry, right? The climate impact of wasting a strawberry is going to come from a couple of places. First of all, a strawberry decomposing in a landfill, the anaerobic decomposition in a landfill is going to have a certain amount of emissions that is going to be different from something else, other types of food decomposing in a landfill. So that's one thing. Second thing is, again, that upstream impact. How much did it take to produce that strawberry? As we know, something like beef is a highly intensive, environmentally impactful food to produce. So when you throw away beef, it's going to have a huge impact because you're throwing away all of the resources that went into making that beef. The new calculator, looking at those 12 destinations, is also looking at the impact that was created throughout the supply chain. So if you waste food on a farm, right, it's basically you produced it. This is just what went into producing the food, and the emissions of that strawberry or that side of beef or whatever it is decomposing on the farm. But as it moves through the supply chain, you've got the transportation, the storage, the cooling, and all of those other resources that go into that food. And so as food gets further along in the supply chain, the impact of wasting it gets bigger and bigger. And so ultimately, like, a home is the worst place to waste food. It's also the number one places people waste food because it's got that full long supply chain of impact going into the garbage. The EPA calculator, or I'm sorry, the new refed calculator is really, really specific into taking into account what is being wasted, what type of food, and then where it's being wasted in the food chain. And this is really great for a couple of reasons. So next slide, Jake. So one thing 412 Food Rescue and Food Rescue Hero have done is we've actually taken their data, and they make this data available to everybody. So you can go in and you can get this yourself. So we've taken this data and we actually apply it to all of the food that we pick up. So when we log in our app, what type of food it is and where it's picked up, we can use the really specific data that refed has provided to calculate I don't want to say exact, but a much better approximation of the impact that saving that food has. And this is really great for understanding the impact of rescuing food versus a lot of other different solutions. Next slide, Jake. And we see that kind of reflected in the EPA's thinking too. Now, anybody that's ever been to a presentation on food rescue or done a food presentation on food rescue knows that triangle, that inverted triangle, that hierarchy, right? It was in every presentation we did for the first, I don't know how many years of our existence. Sure, you've all put it in a presentation. I think somebody even made a joke at, it was either refed or Waste 360 last year, when the food recovery hierarchy pyramid was on the screen for about the 10th time in a row. Well, they've done away with that. And the EPA just released its new food waste scale. Now, you'll notice that this is different. It's a little bit different thinking than a hierarchy, right? A hierarchy is sort of like one thing is better than the other. This is still like one solution is better than another, but this is more along the lines of like what's recommended and what's not recommended. So if you'll notice that this also puts donating and upcycling at the top of the pyramid, just under source reduction, above everything else. And it really delineates the impact of, and it takes into account the impact of each of the solutions as well. So for example, donating and upcycling is the most preferred solution other than source reduction because it lets food be food, right? It keeps the original purpose of that food. And that does a couple of different things. So first of all, you don't lose all the nutritional value that that food contained. You're not, leaving it unharvested. You're not turning it into energy. That was grown and created to be food. Donating it to people and upcycling it keeps it as food. It also has the biggest environmental impact because you don't have to then reproduce that food to feed people. So it is reducing that downstream or upstream impact that would have been generated if you reproduce that food. So it's a much stronger statement about donating food versus these other applications. And this is really critical because, again, if you've been to ReFed or if you've been to Waste 360, but in particular ReFed, you'll notice that composting, anaerobic digestion, turning it into energy or fuel in other ways, those solutions are really posed next to donating food as equal solutions. And those are solutions that are often profitable. So that's where investment goes. This really is steering people away from thinking about anaerobic digestion, composting, feeding animals as solutions that are on the same plane as donating food. And that is super critical. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. So these are things that happened in 2023. One other big thing happened at the end of this year. If you can flip, Jake. So the USDA released its report on food insecurity in 2022. You'll notice that food insecurity, it didn't just go up, it spiked. That elevation is sharper than anything we've seen since the Great Recession in 2007. It has not quite reached the 2007 levels, but you've seen that it was continuously, like, sort of the trend was downward, even during the pandemic. It only spiked a little bit. Now, part of that is because of the CFAP boxes and all of the effort that everybody went to make sure that food insecurity didn't spike. With those efforts really coming to an end, and really what happened in 2023 is we saw the SNAP benefits and expanded benefits that started during the pandemic also stop, right? So I think we're going to see in 2023 that trend continues. So hunger is going up in a way that we haven't seen since there was a recession. And that is really shocking, but it's really important because as we go into 2024, this is kind of all setting the stage for us. Okay, if you can flip, Jake. I know it's not flipping. I don't know why I'm saying flipping. So first of all, this is putting the laser focus on rescue, on recovery. This is taking food recovery and moving it above these other solutions. This is something that is going to be very niche. It's something happening in the industry. It's not necessarily going to filter out to the general public so much, but this is really important when we think about what the trends are and where we're going to start to see effort and investment and conversations and research happening. It's putting that food recovery at the top. That is also going to allow food recovery organizations to really demonstrate their specific impact. So it's no longer just general. When we started, we were just using the calculation of the food, the greenhouse gases emitted from food in a landfill. And we weren't even considering the downstream, upstream. I get confused between upstream and downstream. I think I'm using them right. The upstream effects of producing all that food. But now this not only adds that upstream effects in there, but also takes into account like what the specific type of food is and then where the waste is happening. And as we know, food recovery really focuses on that retail level of food waste, which is, again, it's just before home. So it's where the greatest impact can be made. And with the EPA, as well as ReFed, but specifically the EPA, a federal agency, really calling out food recovery and upcycling as the solutions we need to be looking at, that is going to have a real impact on the food recovery industry, I think. And of course, the growing food insecurity just increases the relevance. We have to be always talking about those things in tandem. Not only are we making this huge impact on environmental sustainability, but also it is a ready-made solution for that spike in food insecurity. There's so much food being wasted out there that is perfectly good. If we can redirect that, we can really nip that trend in the bud. And this is going to bring a lot of opportunities for food recovery organizations. First, funding. We need to shift the conversation to investment from charity. And this is something I've talked about. If you saw the keynote at the Food Rescue Hero Conference that we had in October, and something I'm going to continue to talk about. In fact, our webinar in January will really focus on this, is that we need to stop begging for people to give us money out of the goodness of their hearts. This is an investment. There is a real return on investment, an ROI for food recovery. It is reducing those greenhouse gases. It is reducing our environmental impact, and tie into that food insecurity. And we look at the cost of food insecurity, right? Food insecurity means higher medical bills. It's a much higher social cost. If we tie all of that together, funding for food recovery is an investment. Second, influence. I think that this year is the year we're going to see that there's a greater recognition of food recovery as an industry, right? All of us here that are here at this webinar, that see each other at ReFed or Waste 360, that get together and talk about, how we're doing this. We are an industry, right? And it is time that we are recognized as an industry, and that we get a seat at the table when we're talking about solutions to both hunger and climate change. And I think that these changes from last year are really setting us up to be able to do that. We can go to, legislators when they have their, like the White House Conference on Hunger, and things like that. And we have enough now, really good evidence to show that food recovery is an important industry in solutions to multiple problems. And then finally, there's opportunities for legislation. And we see this every year. We talk about this every year, but it's going to continue, I think, to be a trend where we see chances for legislation and to make an impact in our state houses. If you can flip, Jake. Now, of course, the two big ones are New York and California. We've got SB 1383, and then the food donation and food scraps recycling law. In California, it was in 2022, the SB 1383 went into effect, but in 2024, so this January 1st, it requires enforcement. So they've had 2 years to get their act together. And I think most of us that have, talked to orgs in California or talked to municipalities in California, they haven't quite figured it out yet. So there's a real opportunity to make an impact in California by figuring out how to scale that up. And I think that that's going to also have an effect or an impact on other states. And then in New York, they've added another 88 businesses, which doesn't sound like that many, but it really is. It's those incremental steps of making more and more businesses responsible for reporting their food waste. Oh, something else that I didn't put on here is that tier 2 producers, which are like hospitals and institutions and things like that, hotels, that's a really big one, also are responsible for diverting their waste in California this year. So I think we're going to see, we're going to start to hear reports out of California and New York about like, what is the impact of this? What are the challenges? What did they do right? What did they do wrong? What would they change? What do other states need to think about if they want to enact this? And other states and municipalities, whether it's a city or a state, are going to begin to start to think about how can maybe they do this as well. And we can take those lessons learned from New York and California as those are starting to reveal themselves and apply them for implementation in other municipalities. And then finally, the big one, the big kahuna. Flip, Jake. Is the Farm Bill. So the Farm Bill was up for reauthorization this year. If you don't know, it was not reauthorized. They just extended it for another year. So they kicked that can down the road. This is really good news. This and all of that other stuff that we just talked about, now we have an opportunity to leverage that in the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill will come up again for authorization in September of 2024. Now's the time we need to start lobbying for changes to that Farm Bill that are food recovery focused. And there's a couple ways we can do that. There's a great paper out there that Harvard did with somebody, I can't remember now who it was, that talks about what some of these opportunities are. But, one, providing the USDA with authority to interpret and issue guidance on the Bill-Emerson Act, and then create an office within the USDA for food waste and food recovery. And this is really big. This would be so great. They do have a person right now at the USDA that is in charge of food waste, food recovery issues, but it's one person, right? There's no office. It's I don't want to say it's a toothless position because it's super great that it exists, but it does not have a lot of weight and authority behind it. Having an office there would be fantastic. And I think that's something we can push for. That, obviously it requires funding, but it's not a huge expenditure like, hey, go fund food recovery throughout the country. Date label overhauls. That's another one that would be really, I think, kind of low-hanging fruit to put into the Farm Bill. That would be really great because it would help us as food recovery organizations have some clarity and provide clarity to both donors and the organizations receiving the food on, the goodness of food. Because we all know milk that has its, sell-by date of today is fine. It's fine for another week at least, and it's not going to hurt you. Right. So having some changes, having an overhaul there and coming up with some consistent labeling, even guidelines would be tremendous. And then what would be the top tier, what we would love to see, and I'm not sure we'll get it in this Farm Bill, but I think we can start laying the groundwork for it. And I think we should lobby for it, because if we don't get it in this one, then the next Farm Bill in 4 years, we can say, hey, it's time now for this. And that is investing in food recovery infrastructure. They specifically call out transportation and storage in the report, but I also want to call out funding for food recovery organizations, because it's not about transporting. It's not about having a truck. It's not about having an extra refrigerator. It's about being able to, as you all know, figure out the logistics of picking up food at 100 different places in your community that need to be eaten in the next 2 days and get it to places where all of that food can be recovered. So I think that there's a really great opportunity here to, number one, do some education about why you need a different type of infrastructure than lawmakers are probably thinking of. And two, lay the groundwork for the Farm Bill reauthorization in a few years. Now, that doesn't mean there won't be things that will happen within the intervening 4 years, but this is such a big piece of legislation. This is an opportunity that we should really take advantage of. Next slide, Jake. I think the next one is just Q&A. Yeah. So to summarize, I think that 2023 really brought together a lot of sort of small and different changes that are elevating food recovery to a position of prominence in both thinking about food waste and thinking about hunger. And 2024, I think the trend we're going to see, the trend I want to help make true, and would like all of you to help us make true, is that we really push for moving forward food recovery as an industry that has a direction, that has standards, that can have influence, and that can really change the way funders and lawmakers and the general public are thinking about solutions to food waste and its impact on climate, as well as hunger. All right. Do we have questions, Jake? We do, yes, and we do need cold storage and funding and transportation as well. But I think that's just part of it. And I think that I just want to add this. Legislators do not understand the challenge with food recovery. They really just don't get it. And I think there's a lot of education to be done there, and helping them really understand why it's difficult to recover all of the food that's being wasted and get it to people who need it, so that they can start thinking about system changes instead of just Band-Aids using the system that we have.
Okay, we do have one question right now from Lisa Barden at Keep Austin Fed. Who said, I thought that the date label overhaul and the authority to the authority of the USDA to clarify parts of the Emerson Act was already part of the Food Donation Improvement Act passed in January of this year. My understanding is that the date labeling was supposed to be addressed within 90 days of the Food Donation Improvement Act.
Yeah,
Did that
that
get
actually
changed?
got dropped. And
Okay.
I believe that in our original webinar on that earlier this year, I misspoke because I was not aware that it got dropped. It was in there, and I'm not sure what happened. Like right at you know how legislation is. They make a deal or something. That was one of the things that got left out. Okay. Yes.
Jen,
Delivering dignity and equality and equity is really important as well. I think that food recovery also gives us an opportunity to talk about how people receiving the food, rather than it being like a charitable act, they're actually doing something good because they're eating food that otherwise is going to be wasted and be bad for the environment. So they're really part of the solution.
I saw Lisa in the chat said, "Can you please share the name of the person the USDA has designated to oversee food waste?" Does that, I don't, do you know the name of that person, Jen?
It's in my email. Give me a second. I can find it. Other questions?
Jennifer, I saw it. We will email out, I think eventually a recording, and of the, we will email out a recording of this eventually. I don't know exactly when, but one will be sent out.
I think it's Elise Golden. I think Jean Busby is the no, I'm gonna misspeak. Yeah, I think it's Elise Golden. I would not bet my life on it, but looking back at my email, I believe that is. So great question, Allison. How can we mobilize to collectively lobby? I'm working on that. And I think we all should. I can't speak for everybody else, but specifically, I am actually, we have a lobbyist that is on our advisory board, and I've been talking to them about the Farm Bill, and we were starting to do some research on who it is that we need to target and who we need to talk to. And it's going to be really helpful to have this huge network because senators from a huge diversity of states are going to have an impact on this. I think that one thing we'll definitely do at Food Rescue Hero is when we identify an opportunity is we will email that out. But I would love to and be open to conversations on how to do that even beyond that. Yeah. So let me just say that's the other thing is talk to your senators, talk to your congressmen. If you have not met with your legislators, just go meet with them and tell them what you do and why it's important. Let them hear that food rescue exists, that it's a thing that's helping their community and why it's important. I think it's really critical that we have that relationship with our elected officials so that when we have an ask, we don't have to do a lot of front end education.
Jen, it seems like the chat has slowed down. I'm going to drop a link to a follow-up meeting if you're interested in learning more about Food Rescue Hero,
Yes,
as
I
well
just saw that as well in the email that just came through. Lisa just sent that. That was earlier this month. I am still way behind on my emails from the move. If it's not critical, probably haven't answered it. So there is no Office of Food Waste. The issue would be we want them to create that in the Farm Bill. Again, those were opportunities. So go back 2 slides, Jake. No, 1 slide, sorry. Forward 1. Yeah, so there's no legislation of this. In fact, I believe that most of this was floated and dropped in the early conversations about the Farm Bill 2023. And because things are so contentious in Congress right now, and I know that saw the Secretary of Vilsack speak recently, and he was saying, there's no money. We don't ask for anything that costs money. Some of these things like that could be a reorg. That doesn't necessarily have to be a huge line item budget. Potentially, that could be reshuffling and not adding. So I think there's no legislation as of yet. The plan is to start asking your senators and congressmen to support that, and we'll work on getting some hard proposals to put in through the committee. I don't have a
We
form,
have a question.
but yeah, the timeline to
Um,
really start heavy lobbying on the Farm Bill is going to be in the a little bit early spring, say.
a question from Kristen W. How do small organizations become a more visible part of the system? It is sometimes difficult to get food banks to engage in collaborative action against food insecurity unless certain thresholds are met. This keeps small organizations from doing more, especially when they have the manpower and energy to work on this issue.
Yeah, I think that's a really great question.
The
Among
question is,
other,
how do small organizations become more visible?
sorry, what?
The question to repeat, how do small organizations become a bit more visible?
Yeah. So a couple of things. First, hi, Aaron. I didn't see you there. I have your emails. I'll get to them. I swear. I'm so sorry. Anybody else on here that's emailed me? I haven't touched my emails in like 2 weeks. I still have 300 unread emails, going through them. So for small organizations, a couple of things. Get to know the other food recovery organizations in your state. If you've got a food policy council locally, get on it. Start to have a voice in your local food policy councils, in your local food policy groups. If you don't have a food policy council, get to know your local officials and get to know the other organizations in your town that are not a food bank that are working on issues of hunger. And so just build up from there. I think that it would be really fantastic to see a network of food recovery organizations grow and connect. And I know that some of us are actually working on trying to figure something like that out. But you don't have to wait for that to happen. You can start by, again, get on your local food policy council, meet with your local elected officials, meet with your state officials, meet with your federal officials, connect to other food recovery organizations in your state, and just sort of like work out from there. So we're in Pittsburgh, and Ohio is just across the border. So they're close. We're not gonna have the same state officials, but getting to know those organizations and getting to develop a relationship kind of gives you some leverage in being able to go as a group to elected officials and ask for what you want, as well as to have that collective voice and know what's happening.
Jim Conklin, I've seen the chat asks, is there a resource to get connected to food donors?
So yeah, food donors. So you're talking like a grocery store or somebody like that, correct? We've actually done some webinars. I think actually they're on our YouTube channel on how to approach food donors. So I'm sure we'll do another one this year. There's no organized approach right now amongst food rescue organizations, although that's something that would be great to see happen in the next year for sure. And then here's another one. One of the things I see is that the food pantries only pick up enough food for the day, the amount of people that are coming, though coming through the pantry, but there's still food to rescue. Well, and this is why, so yes, exactly. This is one of the things that makes food recovery challenging, right? Is that if you have the distribution agency going to pick up the food, right, there's a higher chance that they're going to either waste some of it, So, because they're going to just take everything that's there, whether it's too much for them or not, or that they're going to leave some behind. If you have a centralized coordinating organization, it could be one nonprofit, it could be a collaboration of nonprofits that could help sort of balance those scales so that that food is going to a right sized location. So that location's not wasting food. You're going to have a more efficient and effective way of distributing rescued food. And that's the challenge. And that's what a lot of folks don't understand about food recovery, is that just saying, okay, well, I'm going to connect this food pantry to this grocery store. They don't need food 7 days a week. And that grocery store may even have too much for them the one day a week they pick up. So you really need somebody that's looking at the whole logistical puzzle of food that's being wasted and food that's needed, and sort of bringing those together and connecting them. That's the challenge. It's a really tricky logistical puzzle. It is not just, easy to do, but it's really important in effective and impactful food recovery. Great. Melinda from Giant Eagle. Hi, Melinda. Nice to see you. Melinda is she works at Giant Eagle. She's been a great, which is our local grocery store. She's in the community affairs department. She's been incredible advocate for food recovery and really understands the challenge of food recovery and how food recovery can be maximized to make the most impact. And that's what you really need, is you need a partner in your local retailer, if you can get it, that you can work with. You want to meet their needs as well as your needs, right? So picking up once a week is not going to meet your retailer's needs. Picking up 7 days a week or 5 or 6 or whatever they need will. So, again, we did do a webinar on this. It is on our YouTube. I believe it's on our YouTube channel. If you don't find it there, just shoot an email to info@Food Rescue Hero, and probably after the holidays, but we'll get back to you with a link to it. I think it's a really exciting time for food recovery. I think next year is going to be so great. I think we're going to see a lot of changes. I think we're going to see the industry grow and the impact really take center stage. So thank you everybody for first of all coming to this webinar, but also for all the work you're doing in food recovery, and for all the work that you've done throughout the year and into next year. Our first webinar of next year is going to be along the lines of what I was talking about earlier, is how to talk to funders. What is the unique pitch for food recovery and funding food recovery? It's really important that we take a look at those big trends that we talked about and recognize that food recovery and funding for it is not simply an act of charity, which is lovely. Acts of charity are great, but it's actually an investment. And there's a return on that investment in multiple different ways. And how do we frame that so the funders understand that when they're giving money to somebody that is orchestrating food recovery, it is actually going to make a much bigger impact than they're thinking about if they're just thinking about it as a food insecurity organization. So that'll be our first webinar in January. That'll be January 18th. And the link says sales have ended. Karen's on vacation. This is terrible. How do we function without her? I will see if I can get in and fix that. Aaron is saying
the link is also on our, I'll drop a link to our website. You can also go to the resources tab on our website. Under there, you'll see webinars. I'm sure we'll update it there. So I'll drop a link for that as well.
I'll see if I can figure that out today so that y'all can register, but there'll be an email as well that goes out reminding you that this is happening and that you can sign up. But well, thank you everybody. Again, we appreciate you. Have a wonderful holiday season and new year, and happy new year. And we'll see you in 2024. All right.